In the far reaches of space, there existed a powerful species known as the Amazons. These women were warriors, fierce and unmatched in battle. Their empire stretched across entire star systems, and their leader, Commander Xara, was feared and respected by all. She was a brilliant strategist, known for her quick decisions and even quicker strikes. Under her command, the Amazonian army had conquered countless worlds, and nothing seemed capable of standing in their way. The humans, however, were a different matter. Though they were a primitive species compared to the mighty Amazons, they had shown surprising resilience. Many times, human colonies had resisted the Amazonian forces, fighting back in ways that Xara didn't fully understand. Still, she believed that the Amazon Empire was untouchable, that nothing could challenge their power. One day, Xara led a raid on a human colony at the far edge of the galaxy. The colony was small, and its defenses were weak. Xara assumed it would be an easy victory, another small conquest for her empire. Her warriors descended upon the planet with their usual speed and precision, wiping out the defenses in moments. The humans tried to fight back, but their weapons were no match for the advanced technology of the Amazons. As the battle raged, Xara noticed something unusual. Among the chaos, one human stood alone. He wasn't part of the military or any official force. He was just a man, unarmed, with no protection, nothing to defend himself. Yet, instead of running, he stood his ground. Xara observed him from a distance, puzzled by his courage. Most humans would have fled, but this one didn't. The man wasn't large or imposing, not like the Amazonian soldiers, but there was something about him. He had dark hair, sharp eyes, and an expression that suggested a deep understanding of what was happening around him. He didn't seem afraid, even though the battle was clearly lost. Instead, he fought with an intensity that surprised Xara. It was as if he was fighting not to survive, but to prove something she couldn't immediately grasp. Xara's instincts told her to eliminate him like all the others. She had seen many humans fall before her, and it was always better to strike quickly and decisively. But this time, something made her hesitate. Maybe it was the strange fire in his eyes or the way he moved, almost as if he were part of the land itself. He wasn't like the others, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she felt a strange pull to learn more about him. "Commander, should we eliminate him?" one of her officers asked, watching the man with a raised weapon. "No," Xara answered, her voice firm but thoughtful. "Leave him." Her soldiers hesitated, clearly surprised by her order. But they obeyed. Xara watched as the man, realizing his chances were slim, gave up the fight. He didn't surrender in the traditional sense. There was no begging for mercy or plea for his life. Instead, he simply stopped, raising his hands in a gesture of submission. It was as if he had accepted that his fate was sealed, but he would not be broken. Xara approached him, her boots making soft thuds on the dirt as she walked toward the man. His eyes locked onto hers as if he were sizing her up, trying to understand the reason for her mercy. "Why did you spare me?" he asked, his voice calm, but with a note of curiosity. Xara paused for a moment. She had spared many before, usually prisoners of war who might serve a purpose. But this man was different. There was no immediate reason for his survival, no political gain to be made from him being kept alive. Yet something inside her told her it was the right choice. "Because I see something in you," Xara replied, though she didn't quite know what she meant by that. She had never been one for sentiment or second-guessing her decisions, but there was something compelling about this man. The human said nothing more, but his eyes told her that he understood. He wasn't afraid, even in the face of certain death. That intrigued Xara. This wasn't the behavior of a typical human. This was something else entirely. As the battle around them subsided, Xara ordered her warriors to gather the prisoners and secure the area. The man, whom she had just spared, was taken to the Amazonian stronghold, not as a prisoner, but as a potential source of information. Xara couldn't shake the feeling that her decision would have consequences, though she couldn't yet see what they might be. She told herself that it didn't matter. After all, the Amazons had conquered worlds before, and they would do so again. A single human would never change that. Still, as she watched the man being led away, she couldn't help but wonder if she had made the right choice. The Amazonian stronghold was a fortress of power and discipline, perched on a rocky plateau overlooking the jungle-covered valleys below. Its high walls gleamed under the twin suns of the planet, a testament to the technological and architectural prowess of the Amazons. Inside, every corridor buzzed with activity, with warrior squads moving in perfect synchronization, their footsteps echoing like a heartbeat through the structure. Elias, the human who had been spared by Commander Sarah, sat quietly in a cell deep within the fortress. The walls around him were made of an unbreakable alloy, and the only source of light was a single beam that flickered from the ceiling. His hands were bound with energy restraints, and 2 guards stood watch outside the door. To the Amazons, Elias was insignificant. He was just one more prisoner, a curious choice by their commander, but hardly a threat. They underestimated him. Elias sat still, his eyes scanning every detail of the room. The seams in the walls, the faint hum of the energy field around his restraints, the pattern of the guards' movements. He wasn't the strongest, and he wasn't the fastest, but he was something far more dangerous. Adaptable. He knew escape wouldn't be easy. The Amazons were too disciplined and too advanced for any simple trick to work. But he also knew that their overconfidence was their weakness. To them, he was just a human, a species they believed inferior. That arrogance would be their mistake. The plan takes shape. Elias had spent hours observing the guards through the small gap in the cell's door. Every 6 minutes, they shifted positions slightly, always glancing to their left before resuming their stoic stance. He noticed that one of them carried a small device on her belt, a communication pad that flickered with a green light. That was his way out. Carefully, Elias leaned back against the wall, feigning exhaustion. He began breathing heavily, letting out a low groan. The guards exchanged a glance but didn't move. He groaned louder, slumping to the ground as if unconscious. One of the guards finally stepped inside, her weapon raised cautiously. "Get up, human," she said, her voice sharp and commanding. Elias didn't respond. The guard stepped closer, leaning down to inspect him. In a flash, Elias moved. He twisted his body, slamming his legs into hers and knocking her off balance. Before she could react, he grabbed the energy restraints around his wrists and yanked her communication pad free. The second guard rushed in, but Elias was already in motion. Using the fallen guard's weapon, he activated a pulse that short-circuited the door controls, sealing the room. The guards were locked inside as Elias sprinted into the hallway. Through the stronghold. The stronghold was a maze, but Elias had memorized parts of it during his march to the cell. He ducked into shadowed corners, evading patrols and carefully avoiding cameras. The communication pad he had taken was now his lifeline. It gave him access to the fortress's basic systems, including a rough map of the area. As he moved, he couldn't help but marvel at the Amazonian design. Everything was sleek, efficient, and intimidating. Yet it lacked something, an element of unpredictability. Elias realized that their over-reliance on perfection made them vulnerable to someone who could think outside their rigid systems. At one point, he came across a storage room filled with supplies. Rifling through the contents, he found a small toolkit and a few ration packs. He quickly fashioned a makeshift knife from a piece of broken equipment, knowing he'd need something more than his wits to survive what was ahead. The jungle beckons. After what felt like hours, Elias reached the outer wall of the fortress. Beyond it lay the vast jungle, a sprawling, untamed wilderness teeming with unknown dangers. The wall was heavily guarded, and an energy barrier shimmered in the air above it, preventing any unauthorized exits. Elias crouched behind a stack of crates, watching the guards' movements. He had one chance to get through. Using the communication pad, he created a distraction by triggering an alert in a distant section of the fortress. Alarms blared, and the guards rushed to respond. Seizing the moment, Elias sprinted to the wall. He climbed the structure with a speed born of desperation, using the toolkit to disable the energy field just long enough to slip through. As he dropped down the other side, the jungle greeted him with its humid air and the sounds of unseen creatures. He didn't stop to rest. The Amazons would be after him soon, and he needed every second he could get. The hunt begins. Back in the fortress, chaos erupted. The guards who had been locked in Elias's cell were furious, their pride wounded. When Commander Xara learned of the escape, her eyes darkened with anger. "A single human outwitted my warriors," she said, her voice cold and sharp. "This is unacceptable." Xara knew this was no ordinary prisoner. His escape was a direct challenge to her authority, and she would not let it go unanswered. "Send out search parties," she ordered. "Find him. Alive if possible, but if not, no matter." As the hunt began, Elias disappeared deeper into the jungle, his mind racing with plans for survival. He knew they would come for him, but he also knew he wasn't helpless. The Amazons might be strong, but he was human, and humans had a way of surprising even the most powerful enemies. The dense jungle surrounding the Amazonian stronghold was alive with movement and sound. Towering trees stretched skyward, their thick canopies blocking most of the sunlight. The air was humid and heavy, carrying the earthy scent of damp leaves and blooming flowers. Hidden creatures rustled in the underbrush, their eyes gleaming in the shadows. Elias pushed through the foliage, sweat dripping from his brow. The jungle was both a refuge and a challenge. It offered him cover, a place to disappear, but it was also unforgiving. Every step he took had to be calculated. One wrong move could lead him into quicksand, poisonous plants, or the jaws of a predator. He paused for a moment, leaning against a tree to catch his breath. His heart raced, not from fear, but from the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He could feel the Amazons closing in. They would not let his escape go unanswered. "This isn't over," Elias muttered to himself, tightening his grip on the makeshift knife he had fashioned earlier. He knew he couldn't outrun them forever. If he was going to survive, he needed to outthink them. Xara's resolve. Back at the fortress, Commander Xara stood before her gathered warriors. Her sharp eyes scanned the group, her expression as cold and unyielding as stone. She was furious, though she didn't let it show. Allowing a human prisoner to escape was an embarrassment to her leadership, and she would not tolerate it. "This man has insulted our strength," Xara declared, her voice steady but firm. "He believes he can outsmart us. We will show him that no one escapes the Amazons." Her warriors nodded in unison, their loyalty unwavering. Xara assigned squads to cover different sections of the jungle, ensuring no path was left unguarded. "I will lead the primary search team," she added, stepping forward. "This human has challenged my authority. I will see to it that he learns the price of defiance." The warriors cheered, their confidence in Xara absolute. Yet beneath her composed exterior, Xara felt a flicker of unease. The man's escape had not been luck. He had studied her fortress, observed her soldiers, and exploited their weaknesses. That kind of resourcefulness was rare. The chase begins. Elias heard the faint sound of footsteps behind him, disciplined, purposeful, and growing closer. The Amazons were near. He ducked into a small thicket, crouching low as he scanned the area. His instincts told him that splitting them up was his best chance of survival. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of reflective metal he had scavenged. Positioning it carefully, he angled the sunlight to create a glimmer on the opposite side of the clearing. Moments later, two Amazonian warriors appeared, their sharp eyes locking onto the reflection. "It's him," one said, rushing toward the light. Elias watched as the two warriors followed the false trail. He exhaled quietly, his plan working for now, but he knew he couldn't rely on tricks alone. He needed to keep moving, stay ahead of them, and find a way to turn the jungle to his advantage. The jungle's dangers, The Amazonian warriors were well-trained, but the jungle was not their usual battleground. Unlike their fortified stronghold, the wild was unpredictable. Thick vines and uneven terrain slowed their movements, and the calls of unseen creatures kept them on edge. Elias, on the other hand, adapted quickly. He used the natural cover of the jungle to evade detection, slipping through narrow paths and climbing trees to avoid patrols. He even found edible berries and clean water, keeping his strength up as he pressed forward. At one point, he came across a hidden marsh. Carefully, he waded through the shallow water, leaving misleading tracks in the mud. When the Amazons arrived, they followed his trail into the marsh, only to find it abruptly end. "He's toying with us," one of the warriors muttered, her frustration evident. Zara arrived moments later, her expression unreadable. She crouched by the tracks, studying them closely. "He's not toying with us," she corrected. "He's thinking 3 steps ahead. But we'll catch him." A moment of clarity. As night fell, the jungle became even more treacherous. The chirping of insects and the distant growls of nocturnal predators filled the air. Elias found a small clearing and climbed into the branches of a sturdy tree. From his perch, he could see the faint glow of the Amazon's searchlights in the distance. For the first time since his escape, he allowed himself to rest. As he sat there, his thoughts wandered to Commander Sarah. He remembered the look in her eyes when she had chosen to spare him, a mix of curiosity and calculation. "She's not like the others," Elias murmured. He didn't fully understand her, but he knew one thing. She wasn't someone who made mistakes lightly. If she was leading the hunt, she wouldn't stop until she found him. Zara's frustration. Zara sat with her team around a small tactical map, the glow of their portable devices casting shadows across her face. They were tracking every potential path Elias could take, but the jungle's density was working against them. "He's more resourceful than I expected," she admitted to her second-in-command. "He's using the jungle as a shield." "What's the plan, Commander?" the officer asked. Sarah's lips curved into a determined smile. "We force him to reveal himself. If he's as clever as he seems, he won't make it easy. But he will slip, and when he does, we'll be ready." The stage was set. The jungle had become a deadly chessboard, with Elias and Sarah as the players. Each move brought them closer to a confrontation that neither could avoid. The hunt was far from over, and the stakes were higher than ever. The night in the jungle was a thick veil of darkness, broken only by the soft glow of bioluminescent plants and the faint glimmers of starlight filtering through the canopy. Elias moved with deliberate care, every step calculated to avoid noise. The Amazons were relentless in their pursuit, and their searchlights swept across the terrain like probing eyes. Elias had been on the run for hours, his energy waning but his resolve unbroken. He knew he couldn't keep this up forever. The jungle was vast, but it wasn't infinite. The Amazons would eventually corner him unless he turned the tables. He stopped by a small stream, crouching to drink. The cool water refreshed him, but his mind remained sharp. He scanned the area, noting the positions of the searchlights and listening for the faint sounds of footsteps. The Amazons were closing in. "If I keep running, they'll catch me," Elias muttered to himself. "I need to make a stand." Zara's strategy. Commander Xara was not far behind. She moved with a quiet confidence, her keen eyes scanning the jungle for signs of her prey. Her warriors fanned out around her, their disciplined formations designed to flush Elias out. But Xara knew this was no ordinary chase. "He's leading us deeper," she said to her second-in-command, a tall warrior named Drea. "Deeper into what, Commander?" Drea asked, her brow furrowing. "Into the heart of the jungle," Tara replied. "He's using it against us. He knows we're out of our element here." Drea hesitated. "Should we call for reinforcements?" Xara shook her head. "No. Too many will only give him more ways to escape. This isn't a battle of numbers. It's a battle of wits." She paused, looking into the shadows ahead. "And I intend to win. The trap is set." Elias climbed a tall tree, his movements slow and deliberate to avoid breaking the branches. From his vantage point, he could see the Amazons spreading out below. Their searchlights cut through the darkness, and their voices were low but steady. He noticed one group moving slightly ahead of the others. They were careful, but their formation left a gap, a vulnerability Elias could exploit. Taking a deep breath, Elias pulled out a small piece of reflective metal he had kept from earlier. With precise movements, he angled it to catch the starlight and direct a faint glimmer toward the group's flank. The effect was immediate. One of the warriors spotted the light and motioned to her team. "There. He's over there." The group moved quickly toward the reflection, their weapons ready. But as they approached, they triggered a snare Elias had set. A crude but effective trap made from vines and sharpened sticks. The trap snapped upward, scattering the group and forcing them to retreat. Elias didn't wait to see the aftermath. He leaped from the tree, landing softly on the forest floor and disappearing into the shadows. Xara's insight. When Sara arrived at the site of the trap, she found her warriors regrouping, their pride stung, but their resolve unshaken. "He's taunting us," one of them said, her voice tinged with frustration. "No," Tara corrected. "He's testing us. He's watching how we react, learning our patterns." She crouched by the snare, her fingers tracing the vines. It was a crude design, but effective. The kind of trap that relied on an understanding of the environment rather than advanced technology. "This man is no ordinary soldier," Sara said quietly. "He's a survivor, and that makes him dangerous." Drea approached, her expression grim. "What's the plan, Commander?" Sara stood, her gaze fixed on the jungle ahead. "We adapt. He's expecting us to rely on strength and numbers. Instead, we'll outthink him." The encounter. Elias hadn't gone far when he heard the soft rustle of leaves behind him. He froze, his heart pounding. Someone was following him. Someone who moved with the same deliberate silence he used. Slowly he turned, his makeshift knife in hand. A shadow emerged from the darkness, and he recognized her immediately. Commander Sara. She stood a few feet away, her weapon sheathed. Her posture was relaxed but alert, like a predator sizing up its prey. "You've led my warriors on quite a chase," Sara said, her voice calm but laced with authority. Elias didn't reply. He kept his knife steady, his eyes locked on hers. "You're clever," she continued. "I'll give you that. But this ends here." "Does it?" Elias finally spoke, his tone even. "You could have killed me back at the fortress. But you didn't. Why?" Sara tilted her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. "I saw potential in you. But now, I see something more. A challenge." Elias took a step back, his grip tightening on the knife. "If you're here to kill me, get it over with." Sara didn't move. "I don't need to kill you. I need you to surrender." Elias laughed, a short, sharp sound. "That's not going to happen." The two stood in silence, the jungle around them alive with unseen eyes and ears. Each knew that the next move would decide everything. The confrontation between Elias and Sara brims with tension, a meeting of two sharp minds and unyielding wills. The jungle, once a neutral ground, now feels like a stage set for a decisive clash. Both characters are on the brink of discovery, about themselves and each other. The tension between Elias and Commander Sara hung heavy in the jungle air. Neither moved, their eyes locked in a silent standoff. Elias's makeshift knife gleamed faintly in the dim starlight, while Sara's posture exuded a calm confidence, her hands resting at her sides. She didn't need a weapon to assert her authority. It was in her very presence. "You've survived this long, human," Sara said, breaking the silence. "Impressive, but futile. You can't outrun us forever." Elias's grip on the knife tightened. "Maybe not, but I'm not going down without a fight." Sara tilted her head, studying him. "Why fight at all? I spared you once. I'm offering you a chance to stop this senseless game." "And what?" Surrender. Be paraded around as proof of your superiority. Elias shot back. No thanks. Sarah took a step closer, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. Do you even understand why we're hunting you? This isn't about pride or superiority. It's about control. You've shown that even the best defenses can have weaknesses, and that makes you dangerous. Dangerous to you, Elias countered. Because I'm human, and humans don't follow your rules. Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of something, respect, perhaps, crossing her face. You're right. You don't follow our rules. And that's exactly why we need to end this, one way or another. An unseen threat. Before either could act, a low growl rumbled through the jungle. Both froze, their instincts alert. The growl grew louder, followed by the sound of heavy footfalls. Something was coming, and it was big. Elias glanced at Sarah. Friend of yours? She didn't answer. Instead, she drew her weapon, a sleek blade that hummed faintly with energy. Stay quiet, she whispered. The underbrush ahead parted, and a massive creature emerged. It was unlike anything Elias had ever seen, a hulking beast with leathery skin, glowing red eyes, and claws that looked sharp enough to tear through steel. The jungle's apex predator had found them. Elias instinctively took a step back, his heart pounding. Let me guess, that's not here to negotiate. Sarah didn't respond. Her focus was entirely on the creature. She raised her blade, her stance shifting into one of readiness. The creature roared, its powerful voice shaking the very ground. Then, with terrifying speed, it charged. Survival. Together. Elias barely had time to react. He dived to the side as the creature's massive claws tore through the spot where he had been standing. Sarah, meanwhile, darted forward, her blade slicing through the air with precision. The creature howled in pain as the blade left a glowing mark on its hide, but it didn't stop. Move! Sarah shouted, her voice commanding. Elias scrambled to his feet, adrenaline surging through him. He had no choice but to fight. Using his agility, he circled the creature, looking for an opening. Sarah attacked relentlessly, her movements a blend of strength and grace. The creature swung its tail, narrowly missing Sarah, but sending Elias sprawling into the dirt. He coughed, struggling to regain his footing. Distracted, Sarah barked, not taking her eyes off the beast. How? Elias shouted back. Be creative. Elias glanced around, his mind racing. Spotting a thick vine hanging nearby, he grabbed it and swung toward the creature, shouting to draw its attention. The beast turned its glowing eyes toward him, momentarily ignoring Sarah. Seizing the opportunity, Sarah leaped onto the creature's back, driving her blade deep into its neck. The creature roared in fury, thrashing wildly. But Sarah held on, her determination unwavering. Now, human, she called out. Elias didn't hesitate. Grabbing a sharpened stick from the ground, he plunged it into the creature's exposed underbelly. The beast let out one final deafening roar before collapsing, its massive body shaking the ground. Breathing heavily, Elias stepped back, his hands trembling. Sarah dismounted the creature's lifeless body, her blade still glowing faintly. A fragile truce. For a moment, the two stood in silence, the jungle eerily quiet after the chaos. That was something, Elias said, breaking the silence. Sarah turned to him, her expression unreadable. You fought well. For a human. High praise, Elias replied, his tone dry. Does this mean we're not trying to kill each other now? Sarah sheathed her blade, her eyes narrowing slightly. Consider it a temporary truce. The jungle is more dangerous than either of us expected. If we want to survive, we'll need to work together. Elias raised an eyebrow. Work together. You're the one hunting me, remember? And you're the one who keeps running. Sarah shot back. But right now, the jungle is the greater threat. I suggest we set aside our differences until we're out of it. Elias hesitated. Trusting her felt like walking into a trap, But the encounter with the creature had proven one thing. Alone, he wouldn't last long. "Fine," he said finally. "But if you try anything, this truce is over." Sarah smirked. Likewise. A new path. As the two began to move through the jungle together, an uneasy silence settled between them. They didn't trust each other, but for now, survival took precedence over their personal conflict. Elias couldn't help but glance at Sarah occasionally, noting the way she moved with confidence and purpose. Despite everything, he couldn't deny that she was an impressive leader. Sarah, meanwhile, found herself intrigued by Elias's resourcefulness. He was unlike anyone she had encountered before, a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. The jungle still loomed around them, its dangers far from over. But for now, two enemies had become unlikely allies, their fragile truce holding as they prepared for whatever lay ahead. The dense jungle stretched endlessly before Elias and Sarah, its shadows concealing dangers they couldn't yet see. The truce between them, fragile as it was, had given them a temporary reprieve. The creature they had defeated together still lay in the clearing, a reminder of the jungle's fierce unpredictability. Elias walked cautiously beside Sarah, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The tension between them was palpable, but both knew that their survival depended on cooperation. They moved in silence for a while, the only sounds coming from the distant chirps of unseen animals and the rustling of leaves beneath their feet. Sarah led the way, her movements swift and graceful, like a shadow in the night. Elias followed, trying to match her pace. His thoughts were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He still couldn't trust her, not fully. But after the fight with the creature, he had to admit, her strength and skill were undeniable. "Where are we headed?" Elias asked, breaking the silence. Sarah didn't look at him, but answered in a steady voice, "To a safe location. The deeper we go, the more dangerous it becomes. We need shelter before nightfall." Elias nodded, but he knew this wasn't just about finding shelter. They were still on the run, both from each other and from the relentless jungle. He didn't trust Sarah's intentions, but he had no choice but to follow for now. An unexpected challenge. As the two trekked deeper into the jungle, a sudden sound broke the quiet. A sharp crack followed by the unmistakable rustling of leaves. Elias's heart raced as his instincts screamed for him to react. Without thinking, he grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her down, out of sight. "Stay low," Elias whispered, his voice barely audible. Sarah didn't resist. She dropped to the ground beside him, her eyes scanning the area with practiced ease. Her hand rested near her blade, ready to draw it at a moment's notice. "Do you hear that?" Elias murmured. Sarah nodded. "It's not the usual wildlife. We're not alone." Elias's grip tightened. Whatever was out there wasn't a random predator. It was something else, something far more dangerous. Minutes passed, but the rustling only grew louder. Elias's anxiety increased with every second. He hadn't even seen what was coming, but the air felt thick with the presence of something large. Suddenly, from the shadows, a group of figures emerged. Amazonian warriors, cloaked in camouflage, moving in a tight formation. They were silent but swift, their eyes scanning the area with expert precision. Sarah's breath caught in her throat, but she didn't move. The warriors didn't seem to have noticed them yet, but it wouldn't take much for them to. "We have to move," Elias whispered urgently. "They'll catch us." Sarah shook her head. "Not yet. We stay put. If we move now, we'll be spotted." Elias was about to protest when Sarah's gaze softened, as if understanding his worry. "Trust me," she said in a low voice. He swallowed hard, but nodded. They stayed still, hearts pounding in their chests. The warriors passed by them, unaware of their presence. Elias could feel his heart hammering in his chest as he dared not breathe too loudly. His mind raced. This was the second time he had escaped the Amazons, and the second time it was too close for comfort. As the warriors disappeared into the jungle, Elias let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He looked at Sarah, who was still calm, her sharp eyes locked on the retreating figures. "That was too close," Elias said, his voice still trembling. Sarah gave him a small, approving nod. "We did what we needed to survive." Building the trust. They didn't speak much after that encounter. The tension between them lingered, but now there was something else, a shared understanding. They had narrowly escaped the Amazonian patrol, and it was clear that their enemies were closing in. The jungle no longer felt like a place of refuge, but a place of constant danger. As the night began to fall, Sarah stopped near a small, hidden cave. She examined it carefully, ensuring it was safe. Then she motioned for Elias to enter. "This will do for the night," she said. "We can rest here." Elias didn't argue. His muscles ached from hours of running, and he knew he needed to conserve his strength. Still, his mind wouldn't let him relax. He had been trained to never let his guard down, even when things seemed calm. Sitting by the entrance of the cave, he glanced at Sarah. She was tending to a small fire, the flames casting flickering shadows across her face. Her posture was relaxed, but her eyes were constantly scanning the surroundings, ever watchful. "Why didn't you kill me earlier?" Elias asked suddenly, the question that had been plaguing his mind for days. Sarah looked up, her gaze steady. "I told you. I saw potential in you. But it's more than that. I respect your resourcefulness, and I wanted to see how far you'd go." Elias narrowed his eyes. "And now, are you still hunting me?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, her fingers idly tracing the edge of her blade. "I don't know. Right now, we're both hunting something much bigger than ourselves. Survival." Elias studied her for a moment. There was something in her words that gave him pause. She was being honest, or at least as honest as someone like her could be. The trust between them was still fragile, but for the first time, Elias wondered if they might be able to make it out of this jungle alive. Together. "Fine," he said finally. "We survive. But when this is over, we go our separate ways." Sarah smiled faintly. "Agreed. But for now, we stay alive. Rest and resolve." The night was long, filled with the sounds of distant creatures and the crackling of the fire. Elias lay awake, thinking of the path ahead. The jungle wasn't finished with them yet, and neither were the Amazons. But for the first time since his escape, Elias felt something more than fear. He felt a sense of resolve. He would survive. He had to. And if working with Sarah meant that he had a chance, then that was exactly what he would do. The jungle was quiet for now. The sounds of distant animals echoed through the trees, and the rustling of leaves in the breeze was the only thing that broke the stillness. Elias sat at the mouth of their cave, his eyes scanning the dense forest that stretched beyond. He could feel the weight of the decision ahead of him. Sarah sat across from him, sharpening her blade with careful, practiced movements. Her face was as unreadable as always, but Elias noticed the tension in her shoulders, the same tension he had seen in her during their first encounter. She was always ready for the next challenge, always watching. But now, they were both facing something that couldn't be outrun or avoided. A choice. "I think we're getting close to the end," Elias said, breaking the silence. Sarah glanced up from her blade, her eyes narrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" Elias ran a hand through his hair, looking out toward the jungle once more. "I mean the chase. The Amazons will find us eventually. You can't keep running from them forever." Sarah's eyes narrowed, but she didn't respond. Instead, she stood up, wiping the dust from her knees. "We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. For now, we need to stay focused." Elias shook his head. "You're avoiding the question." "I don't avoid anything," Sarah replied. Her voice was steady, but Elias could tell there was something more behind her words. The jungle was a dangerous place, but the real danger now was what they would choose to do when the time came. Elias wasn't sure he trusted her fully, and he doubted she trusted him. But their survival had come down to this. the choice of what to do next, a plan of action. As they moved through the jungle, Elias couldn't stop thinking about what lay ahead. They had already crossed dangerous ground, but the final test was approaching. The Amazonian forces were closing in, and their time was running out. They couldn't stay in hiding forever. "We can't just keep running," Elias said after a long silence. "You know that, right? Eventually, they'll catch up." Sarah's eyes flickered to him, then back to the path ahead. "I know, but I also know they won't just give up. Not unless we make them." Elias raised an eyebrow. "And how do you plan to do that?" Sarah stopped walking, her gaze focused on a distant point in the jungle. "We confront them. We don't run. We make them face us." Elias stared at her, surprised by her boldness. "You're saying we should fight them head-on?" Sarah turned to face him. "I'm saying we have no other choice. We've already seen what they're capable of. We can't keep running from them. It's time to stop hiding." Elias wasn't sure if he agreed with her. Confronting the Amazonian forces head-on was dangerous, maybe even reckless. But there was something in Sarah's words that stirred something inside him. She was right about one thing. They couldn't run forever. "All right," Elias said, his voice steady. "But we'll need a plan. We can't just rush in without thinking." Sarah nodded. "I have a few ideas." A dangerous gamble. Sarah laid out the plan with precision. It wasn't complicated, but it relied on timing, strategy, and most importantly, trust. They would need to use the environment to their advantage, set traps, mislead the Amazons, and make them believe they were outnumbered. Elias wasn't sure if it would work. He didn't know how many Amazonian warriors were out there or how many traps they had already set, but it was their only option. "I'll set the first trap near the riverbank," Sarah said, her voice calm but firm. "It's a place they'll expect us to cross. When they're in position, you create a distraction. I'll take care of the rest." Elias hesitated. "And what happens if we fail?" "If we fail," Sarah replied, her eyes meeting his, "we die." The weight of her words settled heavily in the air. Elias could feel the danger of their situation in every part of his body. But he wasn't afraid. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to back down now. "Let's do it," he said, his voice resolute. The confrontation. They moved into position as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the jungle. The air was thick with humidity, and the only sounds were the soft crunch of leaves beneath their feet and the distant calls of animals. Elias's heart was pounding, but his mind was clear. He focused on the task at hand. Sarah was ahead of him, her movements almost silent as she prepared the trap. Elias stayed hidden, waiting for the signal. The plan had to work, and he had to trust that Sarah knew what she was doing. Minutes passed like hours. Then, a sound reached Elias's ears, the unmistakable crunch of footsteps. He tensed, knowing the Amazonian warriors were near. He didn't have much time. He glanced at Sarah. She gave him a small nod, signaling it was time. Elias sprang into action. He stepped into the clearing and let out a loud, sharp whistle, a sound that would draw the Amazons' attention. As expected, the warriors turned in his direction, their weapons drawn. But as they advanced, they triggered the trap Sarah had set. The ground beneath them shifted, and the warriors were sent sprawling into a pit of thorny vines, struggling to free themselves. Sarah moved quickly, attacking from behind. Her blade flashed in the dim light as she took down one warrior after another. Elias joined the fight, using every skill he had learned to hold his own. The battle was fierce, but it was clear they had the upper hand. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the remaining Amazons began to retreat, their morale shattered by the unexpected assault. The aftermath. The jungle was quiet once more. Elias and Sarah stood among the fallen, their breaths heavy but triumphant. They had done it. They had defeated the Amazonian warriors, not through brute force, but through strategy, timing, and trust. Elias turned to Xara, a look of respect in his eyes. "You were right. We couldn't keep running." Xara nodded, wiping the blood from her blade. "We never could." As they walked away from the battlefield, Elias realized something. This journey had changed him. He had started out alone, a man trying to survive. But now, he had learned the power of trust, of teamwork. And for the first time, he didn't feel like he was fighting alone. They had faced impossible odds and survived. But more importantly, they had done it together. And that, Elias thought, was what truly mattered.